There's no denying that there's a solid niche for spiritual successors in the current gaming sphere. People love these old games and are pissed that they've been left to rot. So, devs, both corporate and indie, decide to fill that niche and make their own. Stardew Valley for Harvest Moon, Yooka-Laylee for Banjo-Kazooie, Bloodstained for Castlevania. The thing is, all three of these examples I've given have one thing in common. Their inspirations were actually good games. They were beloved for their mechanics, level design, good music, exciting combat, etc. The game which Arzette, the Jewel of Faramore, is a spiritual successor to, is similarly beloved, but for all the wrong reasons.
My boy, this piece is what all true warriors strive for.
I just wonder what Ganon's up to.
If you're a 30-year-old boomer like me, then the Legend of Zelda games for the Philips CDI will have a fond place in your heart. These games are infamous for their weird and bizarre cutscenes, coupled with their borderline unplayable status. There truly is nothing else like them, for better or worse, and one has to respect their ability to remain in the public consciousness for over 3 decades since their release. You see, not too long ago, some crazy dude by the name of Seth Dopley Fulkerson decided that it would be a good idea to spend actual, real time from his precious limited amount here on Earth doing unofficial remakes of the Zelda CDI games that he published for free on PC, making them as functional as possible and letting a new generation experience them outside of the context of funny YouTube poop mixing. They were still absolute dog water. But Mr. Fulkerson, not satisfied with the horror that he had already unleashed on this unsuspecting world, decided to ask a very heretical question. What if the Zelda CDI games were actually good? This question would send him on a single-minded quest to found a software company, assemble a team, and provide his answer in the form of Arzette, the Jewel of Faramore. This man embarked on an epic quest to create something that nobody asked for, and was quite likely the only person on the planet who thought this was a good idea. It is a baffling expression of passion that I can't help but have the utmost respect for, just to put this out here. This man is a legend, and I wish him the best of luck in all his endeavors. However, as sad as it is on this bitch of an earth, passion doesn't always equal success. As noble as the intention was, we have to ask, is Arzette, the Jewel of Faramore, a good game? The answer? Kind of. As always, I'd like to first talk about the things the game does well. I commend it for knowing exactly what it wants to be. It is a celebration of these weird and goofy games that the powers that be would like to sweep away forever. I even have to admire just how utterly shameless it is. Arzette, for all intents and purposes, is framed as a direct sequel to Zelda, The Wand of Gamelon. Yeah, names are switched around and characters get a makeover, but it's transparent for how heavily it's saying it's a sequel in a way that won't have Nintendo's lawyers come around knocking. It has all the good stuff that people remember. Wild cutscenes that ooze soul, painted backgrounds, elements of non-linearity, and funky music, while additionally feeling like an actually competent game. Arzette is snappy with her movements, and the control scheme, while limited, is functional. It's freed from the shackles of this utter monstrosity, and feels good to play on a gamepad. There's a fair amount of variety in things to do, and optional quests and collectibles reward going through levels multiple times. I wouldn't say it excels in any of these, aside from the obvious presentation, but I'd also argue that it doesn't really need to. Arzette's a short and easy game, and even on the hardest difficulty, you'll breeze through it. It's one of those games that's more of an experience to play, and I found myself frequently delighted with the immense commitment to the bit on display here. Unfortunately, outside of these positives, I have to say that the game does have a lot of problems, many of which it inherited from its inspiration. First and foremost, the combat is absolute trash. While it avoids the problem of infinitely respawning enemies and zero-player iframes like the CDI games had, the enemy variety is piss poor, with AI that feels like it's straight out of the 80s. Enemies in Arzette can be boiled down into one of three flavors: patrol back and forth in a set space, throw objects at Arzette, or just casually move towards her. All of them can be dealt with the same way: just move next to them and hit them with your sword. I know that sounds reductive, but my point is there's nothing here that really challenges the player. Even with enemies that take multiple strikes to kill, it's functionally pointless because enemies are immobile during their iframes, so you can just spam attack and they'll be helpless to fight back. All you need to do is get one good hit in, and then it's just a waiting game. There's a mechanic where you have to shoot certain enemies with the right color of projectile to make them vulnerable, but it's never really used in any particularly fun way. It's just an arbitrary thing that must be done before you can fight them normally. Even if you're somehow too brain dead to deal with the enemies, there's very little penalty for dying. You just respawn at the start of the room with your health refilled to maximum. The rewards for killing enemies aren't great either, with money spent solely on resources that the player doesn't really need a lot of because they're functionally keys rather than tools to use in combat, even though that is an option. What's funnier is that as bad as the normal enemies are, the boss fights are even worse. Like, these are some of the worst bosses I have ever seen in a video game. They're just absolutely bewildering, as if they were designed by an alien who had never even heard of a video game before. One boss involves you dropping stuff on his head while he just runs back and forth helplessly beneath you. One boss can be beaten by standing still and holding up a reflecting shield that you get like 2 rooms before the encounter. There's one fight that I actually consider to be a proper battle, and even then, it's extremely basic. At least I'd say these special encounters loop back into the so bad it's good territory, but this is a personal conclusion, and the impartial thought that I'm presenting is that these boss fights are objectively awful. The level design too has much to be desired. Again, it adopts this idea of linear levels played non-linearly from the Zelda CDI games. It's a fairly solid idea, but the implementation in this game isn't great. In Arzette, when you enter a level, you start at the beginning, and you have to play through it to get to the end to get to whatever MacGuffin is located in that particular level. However, a lot of these levels have characters and locked paths midway that you'll want to return to. In order to revisit them, you have to start from the beginning of the level and replay it entirely until you get to these parts. I'm not asking for a checkpoint in every room, but backtracking would have felt a lot less tedious if you could, say, start from special locations midway through a level after you've already cleared it once. Several of these places of interest are close to the start of their levels, but not all, and I just think that the game would have been a lot less tedious if you didn't have to frequently replay levels. Especially since I said earlier that combat was just an annoyance rather than something that one would want to actually engage with, coupled with Arzette's sluggish base move speed. The rewards for these optional endeavors are rarely worth it either, granting very basic upgrades like double damage, double defense, enhanced carrying capacity, you know, extras that you'll barely even notice in normal play. The only meaningful upgrades are the double jump and the increased run speed, and the latter only because, like I mentioned earlier, Arzette moves pretty slowly for what you'd expect from a 2D action-adventure title. It may be different if things like bombs or power fists were fun to use against normal enemies, but your sword is such a one-size-fits-all solution that it's never really natural to seek other ways to fight. Not that you'd really want to anyway. Menuing is fairly awkward, and it's particularly rough regarding the lantern since there are a ton of dark rooms in the game, and you have to activate it manually each time you want to be able to see. For most of the game, I just had it in my item slot, so I could use it quickly and just switch to the other items when I encountered their respective obstacles. They're functionally keys anyway, really only finding purpose in breaking cracked boulders or destroying certain types of blocks. You know the deal. I know I've probably made the whole game sound mediocre, and from an objective standpoint, it kind of is. The game, mechanically, is what I would call the definition of average. It does some things good, some things bad, but never really leaning so hard in either direction as to affect the game's milquetoast nature. However, Arzette's a baffling passion project that one simply can't help but be enchanted by. It's an experience, first and foremost, and it delivers everything it promises. Nothing more, but certainly nothing less. I cannot in good conscience rate it any higher than a B-. Though it's one of those rare games that feel mediocre, but at the end of the day, you're glad to have played it. It knows what it wants to be and is completely unashamed to embrace its heritage. It really does feel like a first project, all things considered, and based on my limited research, this is the devs' first real game built from the ground up. I think that now that the devs have a full project under their belt, they'll be able to take the lessons learned and be able to craft a much more solid game in the future. I do hope they have success and are able to continue their work. The world needs more games like Arzette that embrace unconventional design and whose very existence inspires both delight and revulsion. After all, we can't let those goddamn Gen Alphas have all the brain rot now, can we?